Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience Podcast. Mike has over 31 years experience in real estate, finance, and investing. He's passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
So what can you expect from the Mike Litton Experience? You can expect stories that will inspire, motivate, advice that will sharpen your focus, and expert information on real estate, finance, and market conditions. Paula Whitsell, thank you so much for joining us for the Mike Litton Experience. I'm so excited to have you here, and I'm so humbled that you took time out of your busy schedule to spend some with us. Thank you again. So like I mentioned to you before we hit record, we know that we believe that everybody has a story and our passion is to help them tell it. So with your permission, what we'd like to do is start with where you were born. We'll go through your life story all the way up to today, and then we'll talk about anything you'd like to talk about, okay?
All right.
So where were you born?
I was born in El Paso, Texas, right on the border.
I know El Paso, Texas well.
Yeah.
So how long did you live in El Paso?
Well, my dad was in the Air Force, so he was stationed there. So then he got transferred to Colorado. So my next brother was born in Colorado, and then he got transferred back to El Paso. And so then my sister was born in El Paso. But once he got out of the Air Force, he got a degree in mathematics and went to work for RCA. So then he decided to become an Episcopal priest. So we moved to Berkeley.
Oh my gosh.
And, he went to seminary. He worked at the Lawrence Radiation Lab, which is pretty famous now because of Oppenheimer, where the atomic bomb was developed. He worked there while he was going to seminary. So he used his mathematical skills to keep us going while he was going to school to become a priest.
So you grew up in a bunch of different cities, it sounds like.
Yep. And then he once he graduated, became a priest, he then became a reservist in the Navy. And after a couple of years, he decided to go active duty. So he became an active duty naval officer. And then, of course, being in the Navy, being a Navy brat, we moved around all over the place.
Yeah.
So that's actually how I came to know San Diego, because during this trek, he was at one point stationed in San Diego. So when we were trying to decide where to go, when we decided to come back from Brazil, I thought, how about San Diego? That was pretty cool. So that's how we ended up back in San Diego.
So, okay, so we're going to get to Brazil in a minute, but where did you go to high school? Did you go to a couple of different high schools?
Yeah, and actually, well, at that point, my dad was stationed in Naval Station there, Great Lakes Naval Station.
Okay.
I'm a Navy chaplain because he was an Episcopal priest, and so he became a Navy chaplain. And I started high school, and I skipped the last 2 years of high school, actually. So I went to a boarding school for 1 year, and then decided I took the SATs and got 99s. And so at that point, my parents decided that I could just skip the rest of high school, and I went to applied for early entry into the University of New Mexico. That's where I started.
So you're a Lobo?
Yeah, actually, yes.
How cool is that? Okay,
yeah.
So let's talk for just a second. Let's talk about high school for just a second. So you skipped your last 2 years, which is pretty rare, right? And you applied to University of New Mexico and you got in. What did you study in New Mexico?
Well, I didn't finish, but I started studying engineering because I'm really good at math.
Okay.
But then I decided that business was more down my avenue. So I switched to business. But then I ended up going to Brazil. So that sidetracked that whole thing. So I ended up meeting a Brazilian and moving to Brazil. So and when I got to Brazil, interesting enough, they, of course, didn't understand the whole why did I skip 2 years of high school thing. So I actually had to go take my GED in Brazil. And I got a B plus in Portuguese.
Wow.
I'd only been there for a year, so I got my GED in Brazil, so I could say I actually graduated high school. So
So the immersion thing works.
yeah, it does. It does. You don't really have a choice when you can't go anywhere, can't take the bus, can't go to do anything unless you speak the basics of the language. So you
Order
start real
food, all
quick.
the basics. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So, okay. So when you were in high school, what was your favorite subject in high school, even though you were only there a couple of years?
Math. I
Okay.
actually got an award from the math teacher for being the best math student that had ever been in that school. And I was only a sophomore.
Go ahead.
I got an award for math. So but I was really good in other subjects, but that one, math was my strong point. Yeah.
Gotcha. So growing up, who was the most influential person to you growing up?
Probably my dad.
Okay.
I would say my dad.
Sounds like quite a guy.
Strongest personality around. And we used to talk to him a lot about different things about, what made the church the church. Why did he decide to become a priest? Because he was on a very solid career path with being a mathematician. And so why did he all of a sudden throw everything up and move to Berkeley to get a degree, his master's in theology?
That was literally my next question. So why did he decide? I was wondering if you talked to him about it. What did he tell you? Why did he decide to become a priest?
It's interesting because my mom told me once when I was a kid that he was totally anti-church, and she said they grew up. My mom and dad were high school sweethearts, and they grew up in the Baptist church.
Okay.
And she told me that he would never have darkened the doorway of a church. And I think part of it was he came to the realization that, first of all, there's something more out there than just, and probably it was the math that took him there, because anyone who's very into math realizes that this is not random, that there is a intelligent design out there, if that's what you want to call it. Mm-hmm. And so he became very spiritual and religious. And at the time, the Episcopal Church was the closest to being Catholic, that he could be married. By that point, there were already 3 kids.
Yeah.
So that's what he decided. And I remember actually my own baptism, and I remember the priest at the church in the Episcopal Church there in El Paso that baptized us, who was very influential on my dad, and he had a big part in him making this decision.
Yeah. Wow.
But my dad ended up, actually, after he got out of the Navy, he retired from the Navy as a Navy captain, as a chaplain, but he became a Catholic priest ultimately. He applied to the Vatican, and Pope John Paul II gave him permission, despite being married and having 6 kids.
Yeah.
He was ordained a Catholic priest. So I went to his ordination.
Well, that had to have been newsworthy, because that was not something they ever did, right?
Nope, it wasn't.
I mean, I'm not Catholic, but from my rudimentary knowledge of the Catholic religion, they never did that.
But I had already converted to Catholicism when I went to Brazil. Mm-hmm. So when he called me and told me that he actually wanted to do this while he was still in the Navy, and they told him that if he did, that they would kick him out, because you have to be sponsored by the church. And of course, if he changed and did that while he was in the Navy, then the Episcopal Church would no longer sponsor him, so he'd lose all his retirement and everything. So he waited it out, and after he got out, then he applied. It took 3.5 years, and I actually have all the decrees and everything signed by Pope John Paul II at my house, because he's passed away, and so I inherited all that because I was Catholic. And I told him, well, what took you so long?
That's amazing. What an amazing story. So you moved to Brazil. How long did you live in Brazil?
Almost 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So in Brazil, what did you do? Were you working?
Yes, I was working the whole time. I worked for multinationals. I taught myself Portuguese very quickly, so I could be in the corporate world and not be at a disadvantage,
right,
in terms of Portuguese. So I worked for several multinationals, and then I ended up moving inland to a state that was being split in half, and they were starting a new utility company. And so I went to go work for that utility company.
Okay.
That's where I worked most of the time.
So predominantly, what did you do for the multinationals?
I was doing a lot of consulting in terms of norms and regulations and HR stuff, but basically organizational.
Okay.
Writing norms and regulations and how-tos and manuals and technical part.
Gotcha. Okay. So what made you leave Brazil?
That's part of why I'm a Republican, because inflation. No, sincerely, the socialism is very strong in Brazil.
Okay.
And inflation, with all the monetary policies that are currently being put in place here in the United States, they had those in place in Brazil, and inflation kicked up and got to 2,000% a year.
Goodness.
And I love Brazil. The food is great. I still have relatives down there. I go back every year, but became impossible to live.
Oh.
So my husband passed away. So I remarried an American who was there on the had gone there originally with the Peace Corps. He'd been there for 25 years. He also worked for the public utility as well.
Okay.
I met, and he and my late husband were actually really good friends. And so his 3 kids stayed in Brazil. My 3 kids were younger, so they came back with us. We just decided we couldn't make it at 2,000% a year.
Yeah.
And so we had the option of coming back, and so we decided to come back.
Wow. That 2,000% had to be really rough.
That's brutal. You have no idea. Inflation creates such uncertainty, and that was our case. And kids were going to private schools and things, and you never know, month to month the tuition would change. So you couldn't plan your life. You couldn't really regulate things. You couldn't foresee what your family expenses were going to be.
Right.
And you were subject to the whims of the government, and they were always changing the rules. And so it was very difficult to make ends meet. So we just decided it was time to come back.
Yeah, so I had an aunt and an uncle that were missionaries with the Baptist Church in Brazil for 30 years.
Yep.
And they shared with us some of the things that are radically different in Brazil versus here, right? And they breathed a huge sigh of relief when they ended up coming back. They miss it. They miss their friends and all the people that are like family to them down there. But it was a huge relief for them to get back here.
Well, the thing is, the Brazilian people themselves are very, very warm and outgoing. And I was always kind of wondered about that, because when I first got there, people said, no, you need to come over to my house. We need to serve you dinner. I said, you don't even know me, but that's just how they are. They're very friendly. They embrace you. They are very outgoing. So that part I really missed. And the food is delicious, but
it's amazing.
You can't deal with the government. And Brazil had a very conservative president, because they finally got fed up with all the socialism. And the country has such rich natural resources and a good economic climate they had at one time, and it was going downhill. The socialist government managed to bankrupt the largest petroleum company in the world. Because corruption is rampant, and they were stealing it blind. So they elected what they called the Brazilian Trump, Bolsonaro. And the time he was in office, man, the country just boomed. And people were doing very well. But then the same socialist guy came back and they let him out of jail, because he was in jail for corruption. And the Supreme Court, a buddy that he had on the Supreme Court, ruled that he was convicted
wrongly.
Well, no, actually they said that there was a technicality that when they served the search warrant, the address was not correct. So they let him out of jail so he could run for president. So he was not absolved. He was still guilty, but he got out of jail to be able to run for president, got elected, and now they're back where they were, 4 years ago.
Going backwards.
Yeah, it's really bad.
What a shame. So you moved from Brazil to the U.S. You decide to come to San Diego.
That's
Thank
correct.
you so much for coming to San Diego, because we're excited to have you here. So you come to San Diego, and then what happens?
Well, so we're all my husband is an engineer, so he's looking around for work. But interestingly enough, no one wanted to give him a job because all of his professional experience was at running a utility. He was at the top of the utility, running the utility, electrical utility. It would be like SDG&E,
Right.
but it was in Brazil, so that doesn't count. So it was difficult for him to find a job. I found a job with a company that eventually went bankrupt, but they were owned by two Mexican gentlemen and an American, and one of the Mexicans did not speak English. So he thought, well, Portuguese is close enough, you can make it work. So I made it work. So I taught myself Spanish real quick so I could make that work. And so that's where I started. And then at that job, I met bankers and different people involved in that job, and they offered me a job at Wells Fargo. So I went to Wells Fargo for 10 years.
Okay.
My husband
for Wells Fargo.
Well, at Wells Fargo, I was what they call, I was.
We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Mike Litton Experience. If you did, do us a favor, smash that subscribe button, tell your friends, family, and coworkers about our program, and wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a rating. It helps us to connect with quality people just like you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at Litton Realty. Want to meet with Mike? Check out calendly.com/Rio760.